Good evening. Welcome to Let's Talk About Mental Health. I'm Nels Kloster. I'm a psychiatrist working in Southern Vermont.
And my name is Robert Stack. I'm a drug and alcohol counselor.
Right.
Before we go any further, I thought last week I said something, I made a generalization about drinking and then my nationality and everything. And in hindsight, it was inappropriate. Mm-hmm. I really shouldn't make generalizations based on, ethnics. And it's one of the problems of doing this live is that, you say something and then you hear it and you go, gee, I shouldn't do that. So I just want to apologize, not that I offended anyone, but just in general, I think it's just a bad habit to get in and make generalizations about ethnics or races or something. And then you say, well, I'm only talking about myself, but I still think that's not a good way to go about things.
Yeah.
It's
I
the
mean,
wrong approach.
humor cuts a couple different ways, right?
Yeah,
it can either be
you
a
gotta
great,
be careful.
it could be sort of a great coping mechanism, or there could be some aggression to it as well. So
I just wanted to say that. So tonight, one of the things we're going to do, and I hope people can, we want to talk a little bit about marijuana. And one of the things we did was we asked some of the staff for some questions, some comments they might have about it. And so because it's a hot issue, and as you know, there's a whole thing up in the legislature about making it a decriminalization and everything. And, we're not legal authorities, we're not legislators, but as substance abuse professionals, as people who work in the field with addiction and alcoholism, I feel like we need to sort of at least say something about it. I mean, say something that says like, well, wait a minute, we're talking about a drug here. And we're talking about a drug that is harmful to some. And, and so, again, we have some questions. We'll go through them. We'll answer them. And I hope that works out for folks.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, right. I mean, and a big piece of this, too, for me is that recognizing all this sort of differences of opinion and the political process that's a part of this right now, it requires voices on both sides. And I think as we've both been talking about this, I feel like those who are very vulnerable and susceptible tend to not have a very strong political voice. And the folks that we work with, struggling with addiction and with poverty and a whole host of issues that tend to disempower or disenfranchise people and make them disadvantaged. Those are the people we work with, and I think it's really important that we feel it's our responsibility to defend these people.
Right. I mean, it's sort of, we were talking before the show, everybody gets all upset. They used to say, oh, it's a gateway drug. And then there was such a blowback from that. Everybody complained about it. That's not true, blah, 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 blah. But there is some truth to it. And I'm sorry. I mean, you could disagree with this, but I've interviewed so many thousands of clients, hundreds of clients anyway, over my 29 years. And, and many of them did start with pot. And so, it is a progression. And you find people who start with marijuana, they start with alcohol, and they move up the scale. Now, that's not true of everybody, but it is something that happens to folks. So I think we shouldn't just make believe that it's a benign substance. I mean, I worked with a client recently who didn't smoke cigarettes. I mean, he didn't smoke cigarettes, but he did heroin. I mean, we're getting to a point now where we're sort of saying, oh, nobody should smoke tobacco, nobody should, it's bad for you, it's unhealthy for you, raise the prices, American cancer, the whole thing. And at the same time, we're saying, well, but by the way, we're going to decriminalize marijuana smoking. And I think we all know that decriminalization is sort of the halfway measure. Last year was the medical marijuana, and we can talk about that a little bit if you like. This year, I think it will be decriminalization, and almost invariably, it will lead to a bill for legalization. And when they have the bill for legalization, they won't talk about it that way. They'll talk about that it's a revenue source, because they're going to tax it, they're going to make money, and they'll even say, oh, we'll devote the money to something else. I mean, Washington and Colorado, they've legalized it, and 18 other states have laws about marijuana. They'll compare us to New Hampshire and Massachusetts. So I just think that, I don't know why, but it seems like a lot of people who are involved with the field of substance abuse, they almost seem silent on it, like they're afraid, and they don't want to seem as if they're unreasonable, or they know that their neighbors or even their co-workers smoke pot after work. And I think they sort of I don't know. I don't want to be judgmental. I don't want to make these broad statements about folks. But I sort of think that, people need to be aware that this is a drug. It does affect certain types of people. Certain people have a really hard time with it. It is an entry drug for a lot of folks. And, we can't keep opiates out of the hands of our teenagers. We can't keep alcohol away from our teenagers, our high school students. We can't keep cigarettes from them. I mean, we have all these rules about age and everything, and yet very strict about opiates, and yet the biggest problem we have with opiates is diversion. So this idea that, they say, oh, we'll regulate it, we'll control it, we'll only give it to anybody. If you decriminalize it, you're going to increase availability, and you increase access and availability, you'll increase usage, and if you increase usage, you'll increase dependency. So I think that's something that I don't know if people are sort of I don't know if enough has been said about that. That's right. I'm sorry to go off on that, but I've been thinking about it.
I mean, it's and for us, obviously, I mean, like you have, well, I think if you look at some of the social science research, they they discredit the idea, many people discredit the idea of it being sort of a gateway drug, although at the same time they will say that there's some kind of correlation, so something's going on that is at least along a similar path, a parallel path as far as marijuana use and other drugs as well. And some people think with this sort of groundswell right now of popularity, that it's almost a done deal, that it's very hard to sort of stem this tide. And I know that when people talk about the personal harms, so sort of the harm to the individual smokes each time they smoke, the cumulative harms, the harm to the community or socially that comes with so many people smoking a certain amount, and what is the harm as far as health care and motor vehicle accidents, that sort of thing. And then that gets balanced against the idea of, well, look at how much money we'll save, how many resources we will not have to spend when you look at enforcement and what appears to be a failing drug war and incarceration and legal costs around that. And so people are putting these kind of things into balance. And what I really wonder about, and I haven't really heard too much about it, is there's going to be more use, there's going to be more addiction, there's going to be more younger people using these things. Are we ready to deal with that yet? We already have enough trouble dealing with the addiction that we have right now. Right. And now you're going to talk about opening up the gates and having more problems with impairment and addiction. And we can't even deal with what we have right now. So do we want to open that Pandora's box at this point? Or can we take some time and sort of really analyze this? Because there's really been a lack of any kind of research around what works, what doesn't work, as far as smoking, not smoking, and health around these substances.
And I can't figure this out. I was, once we decided to do this show, there was an article or something. So a guy, I think it was in California legislature, was saying about getting a urine analysis, somehow to test to see if people are under the influence of marijuana. Right. And with alcohol, it's like 0.8, 0.08,
yeah. 0.08 is the impairment.
So you stop somebody on a highway and they're stoned. I mean, what are you going to say? Well, I see that you have a lot of munchies and you have crumbs all over you, and the fact that you're giggling, I think you're under the influence.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do? Write them a ticket? So you're going to have people say, and I know that I'm making that sounds silly, but how are you going to regulate it? How are you going to regulate the fact that everybody's allowed to have, let's say, 1 ounce in your house or something, or 2 ounces in your house? Well, somebody has to buy a 500 pounds. I mean, you know what I mean? Somebody, if you're going to have like a 10,000 marijuana smokers in Windham County, I don't know what the number will be, but if you're going to, and everybody gets 2 ounces in their house, well, somebody's dealing.
Somebody's supplying it.
Somebody's supplying it. So how do you want to approach that? So just in general, I mean, it just sort of, I'll stop. I mean, I just sort of worry about it, and I know that we got some questions and stuff that the staff have thought about, and I think these are sort of, as they say on the computer, frequently asked questions. Right. We'll give them a shot.
Yeah, but I think we're finding out more about potential harms. There's been this idea that people drive safely, that There's not any kind of health effects, impacts on the lungs, no evidence of cancers, even some rat studies that show maybe protects rats from certain cancers. But there's more coming out. I think the British Medical Journal published something back in February that talked about marijuana smokers having twice the likelihood of having fatal accidents. Comparing that to alcohol, that sort of compares to a level of 0.04, 2 beers in an hour for a 160-pound person. So, and also that one joint is equal to about 5 cigarettes as far as the TARS and lung damage that happens. So we've known so little, and then to decriminalize or depenalize or even to legalize it, the misguided idea of making smoking marijuana a medical treatment. We don't know enough right now, and do we really want to take that kind of leap when there's so much more knowledge to be gained before we do something like that?
Right, and last couple of years ago, I remember reading that one of the receptor sites for marijuana is located, and it has to do with the memory system, and it has to do with part of the transfer of information from short-term to long-term memory, and basically that basic idea of how memory works. And we all laugh at the sort of jokes when you talk to somebody who's a big pothead and they pause, like you ask them a question and they go, and then, you know what I mean, like there's this. But I don't think that's a joke. And I don't think it's a joke that when we think about young kids, I mean, my heart goes out to any parent right now that's talking to their teenagers and saying, I don't want you smoking pot. And they're going, oh, the guy on TV says it's okay. Everybody else is doing it, It's not a crime anymore. I mean, no, it's not a good thing. It is going to interfere with your learning. It is going to interfere with your brain. You're young and your brain is still forming, and it's a bad idea. And I think that, we have older adults who want to make it legal because they feel they don't. I've told you this, and I hope you'll forgive me when
we're going to piss the people off, right?
No. On Sunday morning I go to PNC and get my Sunday papers, and there's a stop sign in the parking lot. There is not another car 100 yards away, right? And it bugs me that there's this stop sign here.
Right.
And so I go through it.
It's there for you.
That's right. And I don't like going through it. I think because I'm a good driver, I'm a safe driver, and I don't go through it. So I think that the stop sign is inappropriate. I think it shouldn't be there, and I'm upset that they put it there. And I justify going through it because that's an unjust stop sign. It's not authorized.
And you make yourself feel better about this by this whole argument.
So I think in lawyers, they sometimes talk about nullification. In other words, I'm deciding that this law is going to be ignored because I think I'm a good driver, and I wouldn't normally go through a stop sign, but this stop sign is just not legal because I don't like it. I think there's a lot of adults who are law-abiding, good people, go to work and everything, and they smoke pot, and they don't like the idea that they're criminals. They don't like the idea that this is against the law because it doesn't match their self-image.
Right.
I mean, I hope I'm using this word right, but there's like this cognitive dissonance almost. I'm a good person, good people don't break the law, therefore the law is wrong. And I think there's a certain impetus to this that people who, I can't imagine it's the stoners that are doing this. You know what I mean? No, really. I think it's like people who are sort of responsible, and they're good people, but they just don't. They know that they're breaking the law, and they know this is a drug, and they think the drug should be legal, so that when they smoke it, it's not against the law. Well, I'm sorry. I mean, that's too bad. I don't think there's a judge in Windham County that will sign a search warrant to find somebody's ounce of pot in their home. You know what I mean? No, really. And then they'll tell you that people are in jail. There's nobody in jail for possession of 1 bag of pot. I mean, maybe. You'd have to stand in front of the cop and blow it in his face, to get arrested. I mean, if you're at home smoking pot, is there really anybody breaking in the door? I don't think so.
No, that seems to be a fallacy. It's not a very strong argument.
No, but they use it all the time. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just okay. Why don't we do this?
Yeah, no, true. And again, to make our point, we're not sure. There are people who smoke infrequently cigarettes. There are people who drink in control. And there are people certainly who still continue to be loving family members, good partners, maintain their jobs, who are still smoking, marijuana on, some sort of a basis. we're not talking, it's not, it's our feeling that we need to defend the other people who are not these sort of cases that make a really nice picture of why these drugs should be accessible and to be legal or not to be penalized. And those aren't the people we're talking about. Those aren't the people we're concerned about.
And we know it's available, and we know that they can buy it, and then we know it's out there, and 42% of teenagers smoke pot or something. I got all the statistics. I understand all that. I just don't like the idea of making it. It's going to be easier. It's going to be more of it, and more important than anything, it will have this little seal of approval.
Mm-hmm. Be legitimized.
Yeah, in some ways, you know what I mean. And so I guess that's my point. Why don't we try?
So you tried to stop us from ranting on this issue a little earlier. So maybe we should go to some questions.
We'll just do this.
So the first question is about why is alcohol legal while marijuana is illegal? So that's a huge question.
Well, because they're different drugs and they have a different history. And I mean, if you want to study American history and you want to go back to when they made certain drugs illegal, and if you want to go back and review Prohibition and talk about why that didn't work or did work, I mean, they're really different. They have different histories, and that's the. But I think there's people in our audience who are old enough to remember, when you couldn't buy booze in Massachusetts on Sundays.
The blue laws.
The blue laws. And, we have the liquor stores for a reason. We have package stores. In some states you get wine and beer. And alcohol, by the way, when they compare, I love this when people say, well, alcohol, it's not worse than alcohol. Mm-hmm. Well, alcohol, that's like comparing cancers. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like they say, no, it's like it's not liver cancer, it's not pancreas cancer, it's not as bad as well. Well, I don't think it's a good, I don't think that makes the argument. If I knew rhetoric better and I could, debate, I think there's like this, I mean, comparing it to alcohol is a terrible drug. I mean, it's horrible. It causes crime. I mean, there's so many problems with alcohol. To say to another drug is innocuous compared to alcohol. Well, I don't think that's very impressive. I mean,
no, exactly. And we already have enough harm, and violence, motor vehicle accidents, health problems with alcohol and cigarettes being legal. Do we really want to sort of add in now the total burden of potential harm to the population by doing something like this, by adding in something else that's more accessible? Because people have argued this sort of prohibitions or rules against smoking marijuana have probably been effective given that it's such a smaller percentage of the population that actually smokes pot. I saw one estimate that as little as 6% of the population is considered a regular smoker of marijuana, based on surveys, how much have you smoked in the last month. Maybe 10% do become dependent, but we're talking about a much smaller slice of the population that smokes compared to drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes. Do we really want to, again, not knowing where this could go, do we want to open that up?
Right.
Open that wide up to possibly making things worse.
And when I was growing up as a kid, and if you wanted to gamble, you had to see a bookie. I mean, and who knew a bookie? How many people know bookies? There were a lot of bookies around here. But that's what you need. You need to find somewhere. You want to bet a number or something. You want to bet a horse. I mean, this is, and then you weren't sure you're getting paid. And believe me, it was a pain in the ass. But the idea, once the state got involved, and once gambling picked a number and stuff, the number of people who've gambled has grown incredibly. I mean, and has all the people who become problem gamblers? No. Have people spent more money on scratch tickets than they should? Do people play the numbers every day with some fantasy that somehow they're going to hit it rich or something, And the odds are 1 in 86 million that they might win something. I mean, it's really, But once the state got involved with it, more people gambled than ever before. People who would never consider betting on a number or getting into any kind of daily lottery. I mean, when I was a kid, the Irish sweepstakes, they used to sell them, Nobody ever won the thing. I think, it was an IRA front or something. I mean, but no, the point I'm making is that, as you just said, I mean, if you increase the availability of it, if you sort of increase it, more people will use it. And if you decriminalize it, there are people that do not break the law. that will not use something that's against the law. I mean, if I was in somebody's house and someone lit up a cigarette, you would look at them like, you know, you really need to go outside. But if you're in somebody's house and they light up a marijuana cigarette, that seems to be okay. I mean, how's that work?
Yeah.
I mean, no, really.
It's crazy. Nobody's putting this as sort of the perspective of the evolution of other substances as well. You know, nobody's talking about smoking opium, but we've developed and you know, various molecules and components of the opium poppy in order to find something that's useful medication. Peer pressure against tobacco smoking was, you know, quite successful with decreasing, you know, young kids smoking, and we're seeing none of that around marijuana. Why is it that happens?
And I see the states, and you know, some of the states, it's against the federal law. Right now, there's a couple court cases going up through the court system, going to appeals and stuff, and you know, they're going to have to make some decisions, I guess, about it. But it is against the law. I mean, it is illegal right now. It's a federal law, right? It's the thing. And I can't help thinking about when they were changing the speed limits. I remember that when there were speed limits and the state said, well, look, we want to go 75, you know, we're you know. And finally the federal government got sort of upset and they said, well, good, you do that and you're going to lose your highway funds. Right. And I'm telling you, the feds don't take it lightly when you ignore them. I mean, nobody does. I mean, you ask the state legislators how they feel when they pass a law and nobody pays attention to them. And the feds are sort of like that. I mean, you really don't want to poke them. And I can't help thinking at some point they'll come along and say, you know, we're going to reduce your funding for substance abuse. I mean, they're not going to, if they decide, if the courts decide, right, and there's this federal law and you're ignoring the federal law, and I know Obama says they're not going to go out and arrest anybody, but on the same level, I'd be really careful about that. I mean, I wouldn't naturally assume that, oh, well, we'll go ahead and do that and I don't think there'll be any repercussions. I mean, that sounds like a stoner, if you ask me. We'll get high and see what happens. You know?
And the type of research needs to be done on criminal penalties, enforcement, sentences, arresting. There needs to be done a sort of price variance that has an impact on using and buying and selling. It needs to be done, and sort of research needs to be done. It requires federal interest in it. It's the federal government that's going to do these things. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services, National Institutes of Drug Abuse, you know, the National Institutes of Health. These are huge issues, and they need to be researched.
Right.
They need to be researched.
And you can answer this probably better, but I have a good friend. One of the questions is about, what about people on chemo and stuff, you know? And I'm not here to, you know, if somebody has chemotherapy or somebody is, you know, dying with cancer, or a friend of mine has glaucoma, and he says marijuana helps him. You know, we passed a medical law. Why don't we see how that works? I'm not going to argue with you. You know, if you want to smoke pot and you've got chemo, and, you know, my father died of cancer and a miserable death in a VA hospital and a lot of pain and suffering. So if you want to tell me that that helps with the pain and suffering, I'm really not going to stand in the way. But, you know, when they pushed that through, you sort of knew behind that this was not just about medicine. And I know you have some ideas.
Well, there are all
that.
these sort of you know, trophy sort of examples of sort of things. So the grandmother who, you know, is having, you know, chronic pain, that medications don't help, and she has to buy marijuana from her grandchildren. Do you really want your 75-year-old grandmother out on the streets buying from dealers or you know, that sort of commerce?
Right.
It was like, oh my God, no. Are you kidding? Grandma? My mom? No, there's no way. I don't want her to have to go through that. And the idea too, like chemotherapy, you got cancer, you could die. Are we going to be so heartless that we're going to say, no, 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 you can't smoke pot because it's not good medicine? But this is really, these sort of emotional appeals then can sway the whole, they sway the debate. And the thing is, these are individual cases, do not make up the bulk of the evidence. These are very spectacular cases that engender our sympathy, but they really don't touch on the points that for most people, for most conditions, this is not legitimate medical treatment. We don't have any, you know, I mean, chemo, you know, might sound contrary because that's a pretty devastating drug, But when you think about the smoking route, the damage that it does to the lungs, the inconsistency, the dosage, not knowing which sort of strain you're having, not knowing how potent that is, and the fact that we haven't really discerned pathways or mechanisms by which marijuana has these effects that it's supposed to have. It reminds me very much of the old sort of snake oil days, where this will take care of baldness and gout and stomach upset and arthritis. And it's really difficult to imagine that one substance can have such a broad array of positive impacts.
Right. I know, you know, one of the questions that came up before, and we were talking about this, is, you know, people mention about angel dust or something. I mean, and in AAA, they sometimes, years ago, people used to talk about marijuana maintenance as a part of early recovery. And I think for a lot of people, when you take that drug away, when they lose the drug, they still want to get high. They stop drinking, or they start doing opiates or something, but they still want to get high, and marijuana becomes their choice. But my experience over the years of working with folks in early recovery was that there comes a point in your recovery where you either develop a program of recovery, if you will, spirituality, a way of living in your life, or you're using a substance. And that's why a lot of times you'll hear in the recovery treatment centers that one drug will lead back to your drug of choice. And that's why people are so strong about abstinence. But I think ultimately a lot of people are such at risk that when you take their drugs away, they have to deal with themselves, and they don't
like to do that.
Well, they don't know what yeah, I mean, they're so accustomed to taking something that makes them feel good, to taking a drug or something. And I mean this, and I don't mean this like in a sort of smart, you know, Alec way, but it really does come down, I think, to a bankruptcy of a spiritual life. That it isn't a physical and it isn't intellectual. It's not even emotional. It's more about being at peace with yourself and feeling good with yourself. I mean, one of the things, if you smoke marijuana and nothing changes, then you got beat, right? You say, well, I just bought some foolish drug here. But if you smoke marijuana, right away you go, oh, God, that feels really good, you know. I have this sense of euphoria. I have this sense of well-being. That music has been going on for minutes and minutes. Oh, man, that's so cool, you know. It's a distortion. I mean, it's almost a psychiatric distortion. I mean, quite frankly, right? I mean, if you hadn't just taken a drug, it would be a symptom of a mental illness. That you're sort of, that you had this distortion of time and place, and you had this false sense of well-being, a false sense of euphoria. So I just think that some people have to come to grips with this idea that we have a culture that says take something to make yourself feel more at peace and more good about yourself. And I don't think that's really helpful. I think, and I think as you alluded to it earlier, there are some populations that are at risk for lots of other reasons, that they really come to depend on that substance to make them feel better. I mean, they don't, it's not just an extra added attraction. So I just think that you want to understand that for some people, to feel good about themselves is so important. I'm sorry I sort of took so much of the time, but
no, but it's critical, because I think that what we'd like to see for the people we work with is some sort of quality of life, and having genuine relationships, being clear-headed. I really think that's such an important part of it. And when you're not, then that really is just such a devastating loss of potential.
Right. And people say, I wouldn't get stoned at work, but I'll get stoned at home. Why? Which one is more important?
Yeah.
I mean, why?
Right.
You know what I mean? They know that it's a drug. Anyway.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So much of
this
it's,
is my...
So, wait, and it's an emotional issue, right?
I'll stop. Yeah, it is. It bothers me.
Thankfully, we didn't have anybody in the studio here arguing the other side, because who knows what that could have just been some big shouting match. I think that we have to acknowledge that this is a big issue.
Thank you.